As I think about the challenges from a technology perspective, I think the one that strikes me as being most difficult to deal with is just the speed at which technology is going to move, especially these kinds of digital technologies we're talking about here. Um, they move so much more quickly from lab to operational use than the technologies that were developed in previous decades. It's certainly anything that's much more kinetic, kinetic or physical or real world in nature. Um, Another challenge, I think, is that we've just seen such a democratization of the sources of potentially, we'll call them dangerous technologies. There was a day when almost every technology that would be used in a defense national security environment came from behind the fences of some government laboratory. And so you sort of had your eye on the source, you had an eye on the developer, you had an eye on the user. That's all changed. Um, Technology development, especially in these digital circles, is much more commercialized. It's completely dual use in nature. It's much more globalized, and it's much more local. And so the regulatory environment needs to be restructured to deal with all of those sources. And then the sharing, the democratization of the technology is also a function of the way IP flows these days, the way tech data flows these days. It's routinely shared through business arrangements, through international engagements, through circles like NATO, for example. Um, it's routinely sold for business purposes, or through foreign military sales or those kinds of things. It's also routinely stolen these days. And all of those things, I think, make it difficult to develop this kind of regulatory framework. I think, the final thing I would point out is, at least I've observed over the years as a technologist trying to work in Washington, D.C., there's a lack of policy understanding in the technical community, and there's a lack of technical understanding in the policy community, especially in technologies that move very quickly. And so we end up in a situation in most emerging technologies, like I've seen in nanotechnology and environmental technologies and biotechnologies and cloning, in robotics, that the regulatory community is always sort of the police officer arriving many hours after the crime has been committed. And we need to just try to figure out a better way of connecting these two communities such that the policymakers can see what's coming so they can think about the frameworks, and the technologists can understand the policy frameworks they'll have to live within. So for example, when we really started going after better use of data for intelligence analysis, and I first got involved in that in the early 2000s, one of the things that we thought about was, could we have the coders code in some of our privacy rules, privacy regulations, and sharing rules? And it turns out they can basically do anything they're told to do, given a few dollars and enough hours. It's often the case no one ever bothers to tell them that these are the kinds of constraints we want on the technology we're developing. So those are some things I think that we all need to think about as we try to develop a modern regulatory environment.